All right. I think we are live. Let's see how that goes. Hello, everybody. Hello, friends, as we say. And welcome to SerenityOS office hours. I'm just going to wait to get some confirmation that people can hear and see me. But it is Friday, and we're going to do what we always do. So if you're not familiar, SerenityOS office hours is where we take random questions about SerenityOS, technical, non-technical, it's all good. And then we just talk about them and investigate. So hello, everybody. Very nice to see people dropping in. Very, very cool. And I think I set it to ultra low latency. But it does feel a bit like YouTube. When YouTube says ultra low latency, it's not that ultra low. But it is the best we can do. All right, people coming in. Hello, Archetypal. Assuming that you mean me, I am fine. Thank you for asking. I hope everybody's having a good week, and I'm personally having a little bit of a stressful week because I'm preparing the presentation for the Handmade Seattle conference, which is on November 11th. But they want me to have something prepared well before then, so I'm just working on that. Okay, I think I kind of forgot to advertise the stream properly today, so it might take a moment before the crowd streams in here. Okay, so Archetypal says that he's going to teach me how to climb up a set of stairs, saying step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. That is very silly, but it is also very nice. Thank you for teaching me that. So I guess we can just look at some random stuff in the meantime. So some stuff that I was doing recently was working on a couple of different web pages. For example, the Netsurf browser, which is another, it's an open source web browser, a completely custom engine. And their website now looks quite nice in our browser, I have to say. Just for comparison, here's the site in Firefox. Now we are missing this download widget here. But I think Sam was looking into that particular issue. It's an issue with CSS background properties. There's so many ways to express background in CSS, and we only support a handful of them. But it's pretty sweet when you see like random websites just kind of start falling into place, because when you're working on browser things, you're sitting there with one website that you're trying to improve, and you make these small improvements, and they feel like maybe they're not such a big deal. But after you get a bunch of improvements in one site, and then you go and look at other sites, and it turns out they also improved in surprising ways, and that's pretty cool. Another website that I was looking at was the OSDevorg. So OS development wiki, and I've been doing a whole bunch of stuff to get this thing rendering correctly, and it's in a pretty decent place. For reference, let's have a look here. Yeah, so obviously, like, we don't have fonts set up quite correctly, so that like it doesn't pick a larger font for the welcome banner, and there's a little bit of layout issues. Particularly, there's a particularly weird thing on this page that I haven't figured out yet, actually. And why don't I just show you what I mean? So if we look at these two boxes here, like introduction and hardware, they are a lot smaller in our version of the page. And if we go and inspect those elements, it turns out that they are table cells, so TD elements. Right here, there's this a TD, and this guy here is a TD as well. And both of them have width 25%. So this cell here is 25% width, and this one here is 25% width. Now, how does that add up to 100%? Like, why does it distribute all the space between these two table cells? That's so weird, because what we do here is like we take that 25% literally. So these two cells here are 25% of the table or the total available width, which, as you can see, you can fit two more of these. Yeah, right. 25 plus 25 is 100. Yeah, I don't know. Like, this is one of those weird things where like there's some implicit thing in CSS somewhere that you have to track down, where like, oh, you know, with table cells, something or other, and some rule that makes this happen. So I don't know. Table CSS does not make sense. Like, you're not entirely wrong about that. There's a CSS Tables spec. Which is a gigantic thing. And it defines a lot of stuff, how CSS should handle tables, but it's not ready for implementation. So they're kind of just talking about it. And this is like, I guess, a draft or whatever. But I think we can still do a lot of these concepts. And there are detailed algorithms in here that are based on what other browsers actually do. So I will be using this as a reference for implementing tables, or whoever implements better table support can definitely use this. And yeah, there's probably some rule like 25% being the minimum, and then like the browser has to make up for whatever numbers you're missing or something like that. Some weird quirk. It's just on the surface, it just feels so weird sometimes. Like, you look at some content and it doesn't make sense, but it still looks correct in other engines. So we have to do something differently. Let's see. So Daniel was asking, hey, this is a question about the far future. Do you think you will make your Serenity computers / laptops and sell them with SerenityOS? I don't think I would ever do such a thing because I am not really a hardware person. I don't find myself particularly interested in hardware. I love software, but hardware just doesn't tickle me in that way. So, but I would be happy to see somebody else making a Serenity computer or something like that. But as with everything, I don't have a plan. I don't have a plan for software either. But I guess I can say with some authority that I'm unlikely to make hardware projects, just because whenever I tinker with hardware, I always just wish that it would be finished so I can write programs. So yeah, let's see. So Ali says setting both to 50% gives the same exact result. Yeah, okay. Well, that's unsurprising. Or do you mean 50% if we set these two here to 50% in our browser, or 50% here, which I suppose we could just test out, right? Because you can edit these in line. Now this guy is 50. What about this guy? What if we turn you into, oh, we can edit it here. Right, so now they're both 50. Wait, did I even type that right? I didn't type that right. Now they're both 50. In Firefox, I mean, yeah. Also, actually, like when I put these both to 50, this one, the left one feels larger somehow. I don't know what the heck that's about. Maybe I'm just imagining it. I don't know. Weird problems. But yeah, so I've been doing a bunch of work on this stuff, and then yesterday I also did some Acid 2 stuff, which hello. We used to have this big red box here, but I finally took care of that, and obviously there are still issues here, but it's nice to make a little bit of progress every now and then. The sad thing about working on the Acid 2 test, of course, is that whenever we make progress on the test, we also update the emoji, the Acid 2 emoji on Discord. And once the test starts passing, we're no longer going to have our silly, wrong-looking Acid 2 emote. So we'll have to find a new test with that looks broken and also like a face. Let's see. So I want to remind everybody that we normally talk about your questions on here. So if anybody has ongoing projects in Serenity, I would love to look into those, or any kind of you know, what we usually do, where we find some interesting subjects. So what are you saying, Omer? Width is column width plus 100 minus unused % divided by total table column count. 100 minus unused %. Right, so do we have to figure out how many % are unused? Yeah, I have to dig into that. The table layout algorithms are kind of interesting. There's all this stuff. Like you could probably spend a month implementing this. Let's see. Okay, so Andrew says, have you tried out AArch64 yet? I have not tried out AArch64. I don't have a Raspberry Pi or anything like that. I suppose I could run it in QEMU, but I don't really know what I could contribute there because, you know, as I always say to people, work on the things that interest you. And honestly, I'm completely uninterested in ARM ports. So I don't want to get in the way of the people who are interested. And I think they seem to be making progress, so that's really cool. Maybe in the future where things feel different, then we'll take a look. Daniel says, why not make the plus sign in Internet Explorer? I don't understand that question. So Big Smoke says, how would you go about implementing GPU acceleration in Serenity? I don't know. I've never implemented GPU acceleration. I have no experience whatsoever writing GPU drivers. I have used high-level frameworks that do GPU stuff, but I never did low-level GPU things, so I don't know. I imagine that if I wanted to do this, I would, I guess, dig out some card that has documentation and then figure out what primitives are available to me in the like if I'm a driver for GPU, what are the primitives that I can control from the driver? Like how do I upload textures? How do I create triangles and map textures onto triangles and all of that stuff? Like how do you get commands to the GPU? Just figure out sort of what are the primitives, and then try to start writing something that can put a triangle on screen, I guess. And once you can get a triangle on screen, I think from that point, it just becomes a series of iterative refinements. But I don't know. Like it's a big unknown. So whoever does that first is gonna teach us all about it, I guess. It's not something that particularly interests me at the moment, but like in Serenity, the way I feel about it is often that there are so many things that need to be done to build a good desktop operating system, and you can focus on basically any area and have a lot of things to do for the foreseeable future. So at the moment, I just focus on things that interest me, and I like that other people do the same thing. But eventually, of course, there will come a time where it will be so valuable to get something like GPU acceleration, and then if nobody did it before then, I will have to look into it. But we'll see. So Kleines Filmrelchen says, what are your current feelings towards 10.167? Maybe a quick first code review. Let's take a look at what that is. So, pull requests, 10.167. No? Okay, let's just do that. Let's see. Move pianos DSP fully to libDSP. All right. Move pianos DSP fully to libDSP. libGUI. My first feeling here is this says libDSP plus piano. Do something, something, and then you're making libGUI changes. That seems frivolous. And then you, let's see. Everything else feels vaguely related, I guess. The reason is that it's important for the new GUI that this bug is fixed. Yeah, but you can fix bugs independently. Like bundling bug fixes with unrelated development is just a great way to stall progress on your PR, because the greater the scope of a PR, the more cumbersome it is to review and integrate, right? And it's like the type of development that I'm always trying to promote and always trying to get people to do is focused things. So like do one focused thing at a time, and everything that can be broken out, you can just do separately. Right, I understand if the PR doesn't work without the change, but that doesn't mean that you can't do that change as a separate PR before everything else. That's the thing. And there's also stuff like, okay, so my feeling on this PR is that you're doing way too many random things that are clearly not move the DSP full to the DSP, like optimizations or moving to const expert or like header cleanup. So there's too much going on here. And truthfully, like the thing that happens if there's too much going on in a PR, then I look at it for a bit and then I just think, whatever, I'll look at it some other time, because it's like overwhelmingly broad. So I would, if you want to make fast progress on your pull requests, I would recommend narrowing the scope dramatically. Let's see. So Daniel said, like a new tab plus sign. A new tab plus sign. You mean like there would be like a little plus thing over here or something, like a new tab thing? I prototyped that once, and it didn't look nice to me. Like I had a prototype of it, but I threw it away because I don't know. It just didn't look very good. That was the reason. Let's see. Skychip says X is not GPU accelerated already. I don't know what that means exactly. If you're talking about X11, X11 certainly has GPU acceleration, but we don't use X11 in Serenity. Oops, hitting my microphone here. Sorry about that. Paul says it's complex to write graphical 3D drivers. I imagine it might be, yeah. Avian says, what's your opinion on the forks of your project that might eventually come? I don't really have an opinion. I don't know what to think about future things that may eventually happen. That seems like it seems like a waste of brain cells to worry about that. Devashish says, what are fused instructions? I don't know. Let's look it up. Fused instructions. A single instruction that implements two behaviors. Okay. That makes sense. So, Intel. Okay, so I imagine that this is stuff that happens not at the assembly code level, but like when the CPU actually interprets the assembly instructions. Then if a compare is followed by a jump, for example, like compare and jump if greater than, then internally in the execution unit of the CPU, it sort of fuses those into a single compare and jump if condition. I think that's what it's about based on just skimming this page. I'm not super knowledgeable about how CPUs are implemented, so I'm not a great person to answer that. But that was what I could skim myself to. Let's see. So let's see. Ahmad says it may be more useful in term adoption to make it possible to be installed in a computer in dual boot or similar. I'm not sure what you mean by that. You mean like it would be useful to gain adoption, like for Serenity to become adopted by people if it could be dual booted? Gaining adoption is not really a goal for the SerenityOS project. So we don't really do things to try to attract users. What we do is build a system for ourselves that we want to use. At least that's what I'm doing. So the way that I use it currently is optimal for me. And I invite anybody else who wants to improve it for their use case to try and do that, of course. But adoption is not a goal, basically. Paul says, golden rule for pull request is do only what the PR says it is doing. Yes, this is absolutely a golden rule. Cured Meat says that I'm only here for my favorite Viking. Aha. Yeah, I was cutting my beard a little bit shorter, but I have to be careful with that. I don't want to lose my cool Viking look that I apparently have. So Daniel says, does Serenity have a terminal UI or textual user interface library? Well, not really. We have a line editing library. So libline is what we use to have like a line editor with history like you have in the shell. It's also used in the JS REPL where you have history and like syntax highlighting and stuff like that. But that's not really a TUI library in the sense that you would make windows and widgets and respond to mouse events. There have been a bunch of people who talked about building a TUI library over the last 2 years or so, but it was all just talk and nobody actually showed anything. So we get a bit of that sometimes, like people who talk a lot and then don't actually do the thing. But it wouldn't be a bad thing to have a TUI library, but it should be driven by the construction of an application, I guess. We shouldn't build a TUI library just to build a TUI library, but we should build a TUI library because it facilitates the development of like a terminal-based text editor, for example, or something that we need a TUI library for. Let's see. So Omega Killer says, be sure not to get comfortable with being alone. We all care about you and don't want to see you walk down a dark path. Indeed. Thank you for saying that. I definitely don't want to get comfortable with being alone. That I can tell that is a bad path. Just to be clear, like, I'm not completely alone in my life. I am married. I live with my wife and our cat. So I do have company, but not like all of the time, obviously. And it's still possible to isolate yourself even when you are living with somebody. So thank you for saying that. Like, I appreciate that, and I don't want myself or anybody else to go down the dark path. So Paul says that there are some Intel fused instructions, while all ARM instructions are fused. Okay. Okay, so RWX, read, write, execute, tar, xd. That's a strange name. Says, hi Andreas, I watched your advice for interviews and I wanted to take your opinion on an issue I have. I've been applying to jobs abroad. I live in Iraq and I'm having an issue landing an interview. I know I'm good and I would ace the interview, but I'm not even given a chance. I see developers working in the positions I'm applying for and they're not even that good. I'd love your advice on that. I suspect it's the country I live in, but I'm not sure. Okay, so obviously, like, I don't know the specifics about what happened with your applications, but I know from, at least from Apple, where I participated in recruitment a bit, that many countries are very, very hard to import employees from. And I do believe that Iran and Iraq are examples of such countries where it's just really, really difficult to get a visa. And that could definitely be an issue. But I don't know what country you're applying for jobs in. I think in Sweden, for example, it seems to be fairly easy for people from Iraq to come to Sweden because we certainly have a lot of Iraqi people here. But I don't know enough about this to have a good answer. But when you're applying for jobs abroad, I would imagine that the main concern of the company, like even before, I mean, obviously you need to be a reasonably good candidate, but if you just get rejected before even having a chance to prove that you know what you're doing, then it's probably related to the country, unfortunately. So yeah, so you're playing Germany, US, and Australia. So I don't know anything about German or Australian immigration, but I have had cases when I worked in the US where we had candidates from India or from Iran that we liked, and it was just basically we just had to turn them down because the visa was too much of an issue. So I'm sorry that I can't give you a better answer than that. But I guess what I would suggest is to just try more countries and look into remote jobs. Nowadays, like so many companies in the last 2 years, like so many companies that used to be not remote are now fully or partially remote, right? So I imagine that there might be opportunities where you previously wouldn't even think to look. But I don't know, because I haven't been on the job market myself, so I haven't looked around properly. But I hope that you figure something out about that. I don't know what's the optimal solution. But I'm sorry to hear that you're having trouble. That's irritating for sure. TG says, hello, how's it going? It is going fine, thank you for asking. Devashish says, I asked a question today on Stack Overflow about some code working faster than some other piece of code. They used some complicated terminologies to answer that, and I was so confused. Aha. Okay. Well, that happens sometimes on websites like that. Like, I mean, sometimes legitimately, but sometimes people also just want to show off about that they know they know fancy words and fancy concepts. But I really like this expression about if you can't explain something to a child, then you don't really understand it. And I really feel that a lot of discussions like Stack Overflow and stuff like that could benefit from not necessarily dumbing things down, but like speaking it in a very clear way when you're explaining complicated concepts, right? It's not necessary to show off with jargon and things like that if it's not absolutely essential to what you're explaining. But I don't know the specifics, so I guess I'm just venting about something I see a lot, which is a bit silly. So Ecoptic says, is the terminal ANSI standard? So we follow a bunch of different standards, like the ANSI terminal standard in part, and also the DEC VT100 and VT220 terminals we kind of emulate. And there's a tool called VTTest, which we have a port of, which is basically a test suite that does a bunch of crazy things with terminal escape sequences. So it like tells the terminal to do all kinds of stuff. I've been using this since like 2019 to improve the terminals. So it has stuff like cursor movement, which you can run a test for that, and it does all these things like resizing, and it's pretty sweet. And we have like decent-ish support for a lot of the tests, but there's also a lot more that could be done to improve support. And this is really work that, like, I would say is actually really not necessarily beginner friendly, but if you haven't worked on Serenity before and this sort of thing interests you, then improving our support for VTTest is probably it's like a nice little standalone good first issue type thing. Let's see. Devashish says, I visited the page you opened, but that confused me some more. Yeah, I mean, that was a confusing page. I really looked at it with my skim and summarize goggles. Let's see. So, RWX Tar says he's only applied to Spotify in Sweden. That reminds me that a long time ago, I applied for a job at Spotify. I think it was in 2009. Before I decided to go to Nokia instead. And I had an interview. I was invited for an interview at Spotify, but I canceled it last minute because I got an offer from Nokia, I think, if I recall correctly. But yeah, like if Spotify had been faster, I may have ended up there instead. That was a long time ago. Anyway, Lucas says, does anybody know how much money YouTube takes from super chats? And then somebody says 30%, which is accurate. Scott Mayday says, what are your opinions on ReactOS? It seems like you're a fan of the Windows Classic theme, which both ReactOS and SerenityOS seem to share. So I think ReactOS is a very cool technical project. That sort of project doesn't interest me for some reason, even though there's no reason that it shouldn't interest me. I think because I love emulation, I've written many different CPU and system emulators, both for computers and game systems and stuff like that. But there's something about like the idea of implementing Windows just seems kind of unsexy to me, I guess. I don't know why. It just I grew up in this subculture of thinking that Unix is really cool and Windows is a little bit lame. But while at the same time always having Windows around because that's where you could play games. So I have a fondness for the way Windows looks, but I don't really care for the way it's implemented. And I really like the way Unix is implemented. So that's why you get SerenityOS. But I think like ReactOS is a very cool technical project. I just for some reason I don't want to work on it myself. And you know what I think about ReactOS? I wish people would stop hassling them about these like patent issues or whatever, because I feel like every couple of months there's somebody who makes a big stink about ReactOS and they accuse them of like, oh, you actually looked at some leaked Windows code or whatever, and it's such I don't know. I feel like that's people are so pointlessly mean to what's essentially a hobbyist project by a bunch of people who love something and they just want to recreate it. It reminds me of these private servers for World of Warcraft, where you had these people who just recreated an old version of the game because they loved it so much and they just wanted to play it. And then Blizzard, the owners of World of Warcraft, would try to stop these people. But they were just people who really loved the game. Like, why do you want to stop that? Anyway. Let's see. Basirt says, at least we had big issues hiring remote devs from countries that we don't have a legal entity in. Yeah, I can imagine that would be an issue. And obviously, like, only the larger companies of the world have legal entities in every little country, so it's a tricky spot. Cheater World says, are you excited about the ARH64 port? Not really. I'm curious to see what they do with that, but it's not something that excites me personally. Shatan says, I want to learn how to do system programming. Can you help with how to start? So I don't know how you should start, you personally, specifically you, but something that I generally recommend to people is build an emulator. And an emulator that is quite approachable and easy to do is a Game Boy system. If you've played the Game Boy, then you're familiar with that. It's something like an NES or I don't know, Commodore 64, like these sort of 1980s systems are really, really good for teaching system programming concepts, because you have to build this little world of subsystems that interact with each other. And in the Game Boy example, it's like you have a CPU and a PPU, picture processing unit, and they have to sort of operate in a synchronized lockstep so that everything lines up correctly. And I always felt that emulation is a great introductory course for general systems development. Let's see, Ecoptic said, what would be your job at Spotify? I was applying for a software engineering job, but I never actually did the interview, so I don't know what that would be. But it didn't work out that way. And I guess if I would have taken a job there in 2009, I may have become, I don't know if that was too late, or I would have become pretty rich and then spent the money in some irresponsible way and caused myself a bunch of problems. So it may not have been a very good thing for me. So it's probably a good thing that I ended up in more safe, more established companies. Tamash says, hello, Andreas. What do you think about C++ 20/23's new features like concepts, imports, visitors, etc.? Are there any features that you would be reluctant to adapt at this stage? So I haven't looked at import and visitors properly. Concepts, we are using concepts in Serenity, and I think it's nice. It's nice to be able to constrain templates and constrain things. Instead of like getting these obscenely huge template errors, concepts allow you to get much nicer errors and do more expressive constraints. So I like those definitely. I like the idea of import, but I have yet to see it in practice. And visitors, I don't know what to think. But I like that the language is developing. I think there's an overemphasis on the standard library, but that's a bit of an unusual opinion probably because I happen to work on a project where we don't use the standard library. One thing is that I I feel like very often when I look at C++, upcoming C++ standards, I feel like they're not doing super exciting things, but it's more like small incremental improvements, small quality of life improvements. And if you look at other languages, younger languages, then they do sort of bigger, more interesting things. And I would love to see C++ sort of wake up a little bit and dare to put in more interesting things. Like in C++ 11 was a very very interesting and impactful release, and it would be lovely to have another shake-up like that. I mean, it's been 10 years now since the last big shake-up. So Kat says, hey, nice to catch you live. Heard last time that you were interested in Souls-likes, so I want to recommend you to play Neo games and keep an eye out on Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin. Aha. I have not played any of these games, so I will definitely keep an eye out. The other day I watched a Twitch stream by one of the Firefox JavaScript engine developers. She was playing Dark Souls, and that got me inspired to just start another character in Dark Souls 1. So that's what I was doing. Instead of starting a new game, I just made a new character. And I have to say, Dark Souls 1 is a lot easier the second time around, when you know how to do things, and you're not like constantly like looking over your shoulder because you know where the enemies are. Let's see. So Matthias says, hi Andreas, since you have so much experience with browsers, from a technical perspective, how do you feel about single-page applications? View source is becoming increasingly obsolete since everything is constructed via JavaScript. Yeah, I mean, view source is more or less obsolete for a large percentage of the web. And I don't think we can come back from that. What we can do is we can build better tools, but I guess I'm not sure that, like, who needs those tools really? Like, what you really the people who really need good tools for debugging websites are obviously the people who make the websites, and then the people who make the browsers. But I feel like the people who make the websites, they have tools, and those tools depend on a bunch of data that is not made available to the people who make the browsers. So this is a constant issue when you're debugging issues in like if you're debugging website bugs in the Serenity web engine, for example, then you always have to come up with debugging techniques because we don't have a good generic tool for debugging random website problems. So you end up just creating a bunch of custom logging stuff, and it's not great the way that we do that. But I don't know what a good solution is. I guess like something generic like the developer inspector thingy that Firefox and Chrome has, like this sort of thing, is definitely valuable. But I guess, yeah, this is probably something that we should build for Serenity. Like the inspector thing that we have is so bare bones. Like this thing right here. I mean, you can inspect the DOM and you can see sort of the specified and the computed style, but that's it. We could do a lot more with that. But what do I think about single page applications? I think it's unfortunate that the web has become less of a platform for smart documents and more of a generic virtual machine. But it is what it is. I can't get everything the way I like it, so I just have to accept reality. I think you often see these people who sort of talk about Gemini and protocols like that, and people sort of do this world building of this fantasy world where, oh, what if we had a cool web without JavaScript and like just the bare minimum markup, and it would be so cool, and we should just convince everybody to use that. But that's just not going to happen. And it's good to see the world the way it really is and try to make the best of it. And that's sort of why we're building the Serenity browser, because it's undeniable that everybody needs the web these days. Like it's extremely difficult to participate in modern society with no access to the web whatsoever, at least in the places where I have lived. And I think in order to build a real operating system, we need a real web browser. And it has to work with the real web. So if that means single page applications, which it kind of does, then what I feel about that is that it's a necessity, like something we just have to support. I guess. I just try to take a pragmatic approach, like look at reality the way it is, like, okay, this is the web. You know, we all hope and pray that Google doesn't put 55 new features in there any random moment, and force everybody to support those as well. But at the moment, like the feature set of the web, while large, is implementable. So we're just gonna keep grinding, chipping away at it and supporting more and more stuff. Let's see, I'm getting behind here. So Big Smoke says, I remember the Nostalrius shut down by Blizzard. Odd times. Yeah, those were odd times. I had a I had a character on Nostalrius, and I was very bummed when they shut that down. Let's see. Ali says, is that a might have gaming streams later at some point? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that would be entertaining. I guess I do enjoy playing games, and I enjoy playing games socially, but I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could be entertaining, or like not completely like in the zone while playing. I don't know. It's something I would have to try. I don't know. That almost sounds like something I should make a separate channel for. Because it's like a very different path than what we're doing on this channel. Randomly Awesome says, hello Andreas, I wanted to ask if there was anything specific that you feel is currently missing from the Serenity userland, whether it be general features or a more focused application / tool. I don't really feel anything specific super missing. I'm pretty happy with the set of applications and frameworks that we have started building. But so, and I'm personally kind of in this headspace of let's refine and improve these things that we've started building. There's so much polish work to do, and I was talking to a friend about that the other day, actually, about how the Serenity project has basically there's an initial phase where everything is greenfield, and we're bringing up new applications and new libraries and new kernels, and everything is new, and that there's a type of developer who really thrives and loves that environment where like there's all this untouched stuff that needs to be made, and we've kind of transitioned into the next phase where a lot of the groundwork has been laid now, and now we have to improve upon it and make it actually good, and make it more interoperable and more sophisticated, and that tends to attract another type of developer that thrives in that environment. And it's tricky because I like both types of developer, and I would love it for both types of developer to feel at home in this project. But it is simply the case that we can't keep adding random new applications forever, right? Because there are only so many applications that will make sense. But I don't know. At the same time, like maybe I'm being overly limited in my thinking that like there's a person who likes this type of development and another person who prefers this other type of development. But why do I categorize people like that? Like, I don't categorize myself like that. I enjoy all types of development, so why would that be a limitation on other people? I don't know. I don't know. It would be interesting to hear from people if they feel that the what we do in the project has changed substantially, and like if they feel that there's more or less room for creative expression at this stage. I personally feel that there is a bit less room for creative expression, but a lot more room for technical excellence and like technical expression, if you will. Anyway, I just what was I even talking about? Oh yeah, if there was something currently missing from the userland. I don't have anything that I feel is missing. There's probably stuff missing though. And I'm not the only person who has ideas about what the system should be. Like, everybody who works on Serenity has an idea of what they want the system to be. And the beautiful thing is that we combine all of our ideas and try to find the overlapping parts, and then do those as well as we can. So we might not know what features are missing until somebody shows up and points out that, hey, you don't have this thing. We should have this thing. And that happens every now and then. Let's see. Shatan says, I feel C++ lacks with networking. You either use a third-party library or use CLibs. How did you use networking in Serenity? In Serenity, networking is done using BSD sockets. So the equivalent, I guess, of CLibs in your sentence here. But we do wrap it in some C++ convenience code. We have in libcore, core, we have TCP, this core TCP socket, for example, which you can use, and it has some convenience functions for like a callback that happens when there's some data to read on the socket and things like that. So you're not doing manual file descriptor management like you would with straight C code, but it's a fairly thin abstraction layer. Let's see, Matthias says, I can't help but think that even inspect element will become less and less useful. It seems like we are losing separation. HTML comes from JS, style comes from JS, scripts come from JS. Yeah, it's true. It's, I guess, it's what happens when you give people a tool, then they try to get all the benefits out of that tool. And web developers have JavaScript, and it is very flexible, and they're still discovering new ways to use JavaScript to make web development more flexible and more abstract. And one thing that happens, of course, is that the browser performance war had a very interesting effect on the web platform, because the major web browsers started competing on performance, stuff that was unreasonably slow and like not really an option before became totally feasible things to do in a browser, and it opened up for tons of strange techniques. And you see such heavy JavaScript programs on even simple websites. Like if you look at some websites that could in theory be simple, like GitHub, right? A page like this, which is like vaguely static looking almost. It's not like the most dynamic page, but there's tons of JavaScript on everywhere. And because it's more convenient to build websites that way, which I totally get, and it's feasible because web browsers started competing on performance. And I feel like as long as there is a browser performance war, then that's just going to keep getting more complex, and they're going to keep finding new things to do with JavaScript. So for that reason, actually, I was really interested in Microsoft Edge. They were doing this experiment called the super duper secure mode, where they turn off the JavaScript JIT and as a security measure. And I think that's a really interesting alternative path for the web platform, that we start to say, maybe we've gone a little too far with JavaScript performance, like throwing out everything in just to get more performance. Maybe that's not the right strategy. And I would be really happy to see this become a new direction. And you can't like, obviously you can't undo all the architectural stuff that's happened, and how JavaScript has become sort of the way that it's become. Like you can't really undo it, but if you can de-emphasize performance of the language and steer it towards security or robustness or things like that, I feel like that would be very interesting. And it's also interesting from the perspective of the Serenity project, because it's not really possible for us to compete on performance anytime soon in JavaScript, at least with the major engines, because the major engines have huge teams dedicated to nothing but JavaScript performance. They have multi-tiered compilers with very sophisticated optimization pipelines. And while we can implement many optimizations ourselves, it's just we have such a broad scope in our project, so it's hard to compete on something where there's such a fixation within the other browsers. I don't know. At the same time, like, I don't want to be pessimistic about it either, because we can do all kinds of stuff. don't have to follow the rules. Maybe we can compete. What do I know? Anyway, I'm just babbling at this point, so I'm gonna have to move forward. Let's see. Luke says that even Photoshop is on the web now. Yeah, I heard about that. That's weird. Ecoptic says, did you hear about Noita? I did not hear about Noita. What is Noita? It is a game. Okay. Let's see a picture of the game. Looks like some kind of 2D action game. Which I admit I enjoy that sort of game every now and then, so maybe I should check that out. SerenityOS Gaming, a stream where you play the games within it and log/fix issues. Ooh, yeah, that would be good. Just making the games and then playing the games. Let's see. F Society 00 says, what do you think about Plan 9? I have not used Plan 9 enough to really have an opinion about it. Interesting concept, but I don't have enough experience to comment. Paul says, I see SerenityOS being used by developers simply because the source is available to be able to add or tweak needed tools, less the standard desktop interferences. Right. Yeah. That is definitely the type of system that I want to create and provide for people. It is a system for systems programmers. And ideally, if you're into systems development, then Serenity should be perfect for you. Like, if you like fixing the type of issues that it has, or working on the type of features that it has, then I want the system to be extremely hackable, understandable, extremely interconnected, so that anything you improve almost always improves something else as well. But yeah, like, the source is available, and not just available, but like unified, and it's all in one place. It's not like, you know, how the Linux desktop system, the source is available for the most part, but it is spread out and kind of disjoint in a way that Serenity is not. Let's see. Manish says, this might be a bit off topic, but what resource would you suggest for a beginner to learn data structures and algorithms if you already know C++ or C? So I would recommend just picking random data structures and algorithms and implementing them. And that's something that I did, by the way. So I don't know, 15 years ago or something now, I would just pick a random data structure, read about it on Wikipedia, and then implement it myself. because I thought, because I didn't get a higher education in computer science, I always felt like I have to make up for that by learning data structures and algorithms on my own. So something that I did in the past was like I would just look up algorithms and data structures on Wikipedia, or something I also did was go on YouTube and look for like MIT lectures, like MIT data structures, and they have these MIT professors going through different data structures, and you can watch these talks about that and learn. Like if you have 45 minutes or so to spend, you can learn a new data structure algorithm by having somebody explain it to you on a whiteboard, like somebody who's really good at it. And I think this is a really, really good use of your time if you don't have, if you don't know where to go, just go and check out one of these. Anyway, let's see. Vamos says, 2 newbie questions. How much assembly language does one need to know before starting operating system development? And 2, can my hardware mess up in a process of developing an operating system? So you don't really need to know any assembly language, but you do need to know, if you want to make a kernel specifically, operating system development, in my view, is a very broad topic that encompasses an entire operating system, not just a kernel. Many people think of OS Dev as making kernels. To me, kernels is like 10% of operating system development. And then there's all this other stuff. But to build a kernel, you don't need assembly language, but you do need to understand the CPU that you're targeting. And it's hard to learn how a CPU works without accidentally learning some assembly language, if that makes sense. So in order to boot a kernel and to like any kind of sophisticated kernel that has memory protection and paging and stuff like that, you are going to have to interface with the CPU, and it's hard to do that without some assembly. So anyways, to turn this into a recommendation, I recommend making one small program. Just make one small program with assembly. Make hello world with assembly, and make sure that you understand how it works. And then if you can do that, then you can start to investigate. Then you will have a much easier time understanding how assembly is used in a kernel, because you will understand sort of the instruction formats and so on. Let's see. Tommy Tom Tomastini says, I'm so happy that I caught your office hours. My office hours was horrible. I wanted to steal a stapler out of anger. Well, I hope you didn't steal a stapler. I know in the past, when I felt really bad, I would sometimes take pens from work to make myself feel better. And it was a very strange behavior, but like I would take pens and Post-its and just take them home. And then I feel like I got back at my job from making me feel bad. And then I never used the pens or Post-its for anything. I don't know what the hell that was about, but I don't think it made me feel any better. So I hope that you didn't steal a stapler, and I recommend that nobody steal staplers from work or anything else, because it will just make you feel bad. And I hope that you're feeling better now that your office hours are over. Ecoptic says, the unique thing in Noita is that every pixel is simulated like the powder toy, and there are different materials, liquids, etc. Well, that does sound like a unique technical thing, sure. But ultimately, with games, at least in my case, like I only care if it's fun. Like a game can look like crap, and if it's fun, I'll still play. And the most impressive game visually, if it's not fun, I don't want to play. So Jared says, piggybacking off of the browser discussion, do you see yourself switching the browser for something already built? No, definitely not. Like Chromium to help with adoption. No, I'm not interested in that, and I'm also not interested in adoption. Adoption is a non-goal of the SerenityOS project, and I only care that developers who want to work on Serenity, I only care about what they do and what they want. And people who don't work on Serenity are irrelevant to Serenity, basically, in terms of like what the system does. Let's see. Echo Octa says, what is your opinion on functional programming? Is making an OS mainly using functional programming achievable? I haven't done enough FP to have an opinion about that, so I can't really give you a good answer. So I'm just not going to try. Let's see. Barish says, what do you recommend for CS students in their OS lessons? What should we do? Read and write like projects? That I don't know that. I've never been to university. I've never taken operating systems classes or anything like that. So I don't really know what's in your curriculum, but in general, what I would recommend for anybody is to write lots of code and write larger programs, like not just small programs. I think one mistake that many young people make, especially, is that they make lots of little things and they never try to make anything big. And it's when you make medium or bigger things, that's when you really grow as a developer. Because medium and large projects challenge you to not just use a technique, but to actually integrate them with each other and combine techniques in new ways. And that's what programming is all about. Let's see. Andrew Castor says, do you care enough about the proliferation of separate CSS specs to go on a crusade to unify them? No, not really. But I do care about improving the ergonomics of those specs. So I was talking briefly with some spec editors the other day about making better tools for like cross spec references and things like that. And they were receptive to to the suggestions. But I at this point, I care more about implementing CSS than I do about specifying CSS. That may change in the future once our implementation is better or stronger. But at the moment, I feel like the most valuable thing that we can do, like if you think about the great scheme of things with the Serenity web engine, I think it's a very valuable thing that we have here, that we are making an independent implementation of the web platform, which is a pretty rare thing these days. Like people don't really, not a lot of people attempt this. And I think it's a valuable thing to pursue, and who knows what will come of it, right? But we've put so much time into it now, we've come so far, so we might as well keep going and see what happens. And I think it's more valuable that we pursue correctness in our implementation and like maturity than sort of getting into bickering about specs and how they should work. We'll see. Matthias says that he sees me using functional concepts all the time with lambdas. Right, concepts, functional concepts, sure. Let's see. Oh, Tamerlan with the super chat. Thank you very much, Tamerlan. Tamerlan, that's such an interesting name. Where is that from? Tamerlan name. Persian name. A man of iron. That is a cool name. Thank you for the super chat, Tamerlan. Mustafa says, if you could magically change one item in any spec of your choosing, what would it be and why? You know, okay, I'll show you what's something that bothers me in a spec recently. The CSS Flexbox spec is, where can I read that? The CSS flexible box layout spec has a lot of things that I would like to be a little bit different. I remember struggling through this thing is one of the things that I was really frustrated with is that it has this layout algorithm for display flex, for Flexbox, right? And I don't remember exactly where it was, but I found a place here where like in step A, you compute the size of something. And then in order to compute that, you need the some metric that is computed in the next step, step B. And you can't have that information yet. So I don't remember what it is. It would be a lot more illustrative if I could point to it. but there's like, a lot of these specifications are written in a very strange way because they're sort of written based on what browsers do, rather than like making the spec first and then somebody implements the spec and then you just verify that they implemented it correctly. Like a lot of the web specs are written sort of upside down. Like the web existed and it had a behavior, and then somebody said, oh, we should probably write specs for this. And it's a lot better nowadays than it used to be, but you still feel that sometimes that like they skip over parts, or like stuff is in an order that doesn't make sense because you can't know this information yet. But your question was like, what's something I would change? I guess if I could change anything, I would make the CSS flexible box layout algorithm imperative, like step by step, just tell me what to do, dang it. Instructions here are so vague and declarative, some of them. Anyway, let's see. Big Smoke says, I'm going to graduate university this year, fourth year MComp, and I honestly feel like a beginner, a professional beginner. Right. Well, that's healthy, I think. People who are fresh out of university are more or less beginners. Like if you're working in a professional context and you have fresh university graduates join your team, then you know what I'm talking about. Like people fresh out of university, most of them don't really know what they're doing. They have some basic understanding of programming, but they don't have professional experience, and you'll find that you will gain that quickly, of course, by participating in like real world professional development. But I think it's normal to feel like a beginner, and it's much better to feel like a beginner when you are a beginner than it is to feel like a know-it-all or feel like you know everything, because those recent graduates can be very frustrating. Let's see. Tommy Tom Tomastini says he was half joking, not going to steal anything, but had a crappy day with crappy coworkers. But he does need Post-its, so maybe it's a bit more justifiable to steal Post-its if you have a legit need for them. I would still recommend not stealing from your employer. You can get reasonably cheap Post-its at your paper supply store. Let's see. Luke says, one of my favorite parts of us starting from scratch is contributing back with spec and browser issues. Absolutely. That's one of my favorite things too, especially recently. It's been so awesome to see people from Serenity making pull requests to like web specs and JavaScript specs and filing bugs against WebKit or Blink or Gecko or whatever. Like the fact that we are participating in the greater browser engineering community and like pointing out flaws and helping move the platform forward, even if we're just taking small steps, right? Like just oh, here's a bug and like here's a small improvement. Like everybody starts somewhere, and that is really, really awesome, and it just warms my heart to see like all of the folks who came to Serenity like not knowing anything about browser development, and they sort of grew up as browser engineers with the Serenity browser engine. And there's still people joining now, like, and if anybody is like remotely interested in working on a browser and understanding how they work, then I think it's an absolutely invaluable opportunity at the moment to participate in the browser development in Serenity, because there are not going to be many opportunities to join a browser engine at this immature stage. That's not something that happens often, and you can learn a ton of stuff by doing that. And I think everybody who's joined has grown immensely as a developer from participating. I'm really proud of everybody. Let's see. Elephant says, "Who is the greatest programmer that ever lived, in your opinion?" I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't really like to rank people or like think in terms of who's better or worse than other people. I think I like to evaluate things more like who has good habits, who has bad habits, and to always remember that everybody is malleable and flexible, and like people with bad habits can shed those bad habits and gain good habits instead, and vice versa. And then really being a good programmer is more about sort of systematically accumulating good habits and being consistent with them. And I think there are a lot of people who do that well. But I don't really have a greatest programmer or something like that. Vedang says, have you thought of implementing LDAP functionality in Serenity or porting it? I have not actively thought about that, but I'm aware of LDAP. I don't know. It's not something I need for anything, so I'm not personally interested in implementing it. But, you know, if somebody said like, oh, I need to have LDAP on Serenity because I want to use it for this and that, and they bring an LDAP implementation, then why not? Let's take a look at it. Samuel says, I will be teaching an OS course next year. Do you have any advice for me and in general for people trying to teach? Ooh, I guess maybe my main advice for anybody trying to teach is to try to put students into an environment where there's lots of room for creativity and expression, and like open-ended problems are always cool. Like you can structure problems in a way that you say, I have this input, I want you to write a program that gets me this output, and then, you know, bonus points if you can make it faster, for example. or see how fast you can make it, or how small you can make it, or there's all kinds of sort of axes that you can scale on. And that's something that I always enjoyed doing when I had interns, especially like I was managing interns sometimes, and I like to tell them that, like, okay, well, can you make it faster after they solve something? Okay, so Samuel said that, I mean more specifically related to operating systems. Is there something that isn't usually talked about that you think is important, or vice versa? Yes, one thing. I think that browsers are sort of the more important operating system of today. And I feel like operating systems courses are obsessed with kernels and low-level things, where when so much of the actual programs that get written and run today are run in a browser. And I think it would be, and I realize that this is probably like far outside the constraints of your curriculum, but I really would love to see browser engines being taught to students so that they can understand the environment, how it actually is constructed, the environment that runs most modern day applications. That's something I would really love to see. And I don't know of anybody even trying to teach it. Let's see. Tommy says, how much time would you estimate you and others have put into the text editor widget? Seems to be one of the most complex widgets in your opinion. I don't know how much time has gone into it, but definitely a couple of man weeks. A text editor widget is a complex thing. Like, there's a lot of little details about a text editor that, like, you can write a text editor widget in an evening that does basic text editing, but it will take you a much longer time to make one that feels good to use, and one that has like all the little keyboard movements and things that you take for granted. You know, stuff like control left, control right to jump words, and like all these little details, or like word wrap, and syntax highlighting and stuff like that. So I don't know. I would guess if I had to write it from scratch now, knowing how the current one works, like if I just had to re-implement it, I think I could probably do it in a week. But it would have bugs for sure. But it took a long time to figure everything out, like how we wanted it to be. And it's far from perfect. Like, it has a lot of pathologies, especially performance pathologies, where it just, for example, if you have really long lines, it's not good at that. And it could benefit from using a smarter data structure for long lines, so that you could do like random insertion, for example. And I know there are a lot of different schools of thought for that, like using ropes is a common technique, for example. Let's see. Dr. Deathvolt says, where can I start for socket programming? So there's what's it called? Beej Socket Guide? Beej's Guide to Networking. This is a very good introductory guide to network programming in Unix environments. I have seen a lot of people learn stuff with that, so I think I would recommend it probably. Let's see. Vamos says, how do you keep yourself up to date with new advancements in the OS space? I don't know that I do. I think, I just read technical news, and whenever there's a major release of some other operating system, I guess I look at, change logs, see what they did, what are some of the new innovations? And in particular, there's a lot of interesting innovation happening in security always, because it's like this cat and mouse game where people make exploits for bugs, and then operating systems try to protect against exploitation, and then a lot of innovations happen in that way. And I do try to stay on top of interesting things in that area, but I don't have a structured or systematic way of doing it. I just kind of hope that the information reaches me. I don't know if there's a like a newsletter or something about like advancements in OS design. Dead Mew says, "Hi Andreas. Do you think SerenityOS would be better or worse overall following a microkernel design? I know for a fact that it would be a lot worse if I had implemented a microkernel, because I started building a microkernel originally, and it was so boring that I decided to stop, because I knew that I was never going to continue with this project if I had to keep writing it as a microkernel. So if if we hadn't switched to a monolithic design, the project wouldn't exist today." Samuel says, "Perhaps the browser engineering stuff is something that could be pitched as a separate course. I know some people with expertise in the area." Yeah, I think that's, I would love to see that. But as far as like typical university operating systems classes and their curriculum, I don't know much about them. Maybe one thing I often see I've seen like some example assignments, and I often see like, oh, write a malloc, right? And then they say write a malloc and use SBRK, like this old school heap expansion Unix primitive SBRK. And I always feel like, why teach people SBRK? Why not teach them how to write an mmap based malloc instead? Because it's not that much more complicated, and then you can teach a lot of more interesting malloc designs instead of just make the heap bigger. You have to like manage the memory mappings. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. So Mustafa said, "In your opinion, how do these security features of Serenity compare to other operating systems?" So we have like a fairly thick set of security features for sure. And I think we've definitely adopted a defense in depth strategy, right? Where you sort of layer many different defenses and mitigations on top of each other. And even if something breaks through like one or two of them, then there's something underneath those that catches the exploitation attempt eventually. And I really like that approach. And we have, like, when it comes to comparing against other systems, we have a lot of the same mechanisms as Linux and OpenBSD. Like a lot of the classical, what's it called, packs or Linux packs? Is it called packs? Security? Packs, yeah. We have a lot of the classical packs mechanisms, and we also have a bunch of the OpenBSD inventions. And I don't know of any really large thing that we're missing, but that's probably because I haven't looked at it for a while. Like, to be honest, it's been almost like 10 months or something since I looked at system security. And I remember last time I was looking at it, I was concerned because I was obsessing about it and not doing anything else. And I thought, oh, I have to do something other than security for a while. And now it's suddenly October, apparently. But I do think that we have a fairly sophisticated security model. And I am quite happy with it. I also think we should look for refinements, and we should absolutely look for interesting mechanisms that other systems have and steal them. That's what I think. So Knut Bluetooth says, hi Andreas, I was wondering, what do you think of HaikuOS? It is also mostly written in C++ and has a sober 90s user interface and a lot of Unix compatibility. I think HaikuOS is a fine project. Seems to be made by fine people. It is also completely uninteresting to me because I have no particular fondness for BOS. And it is Haiku, as far as I know, is written in a basically ancient version of C++ that they tether themselves to because they want to be, I think, binary compatible with something like BOS binaries or whatever. So that doesn't seem like an interesting environment to work in for me. But for the people who enjoy that environment, like, it seems like an awesome project, and I'm happy that it exists, and I really hope that they have all the success in the world. One thing that makes Haiku completely different from Serenity is that Haiku is actively trying to gain users, whereas Serenity is actively trying to avoid users, and we only want developers. So very, very different philosophies. Owner says, why do we need sudo to run QEMU? Well, you don't need sudo to run QEMU. You need sudo to build the disk image. So when you do ninja image, then I have to give my password, because it's creating a new file system on a disk image, and that disk image is mounted in order to copy files into it. And we can't mount the disk image without root access. So it's that is my biggest advice. And don't feel like you have to start with a bootloader just because everybody starts with a bootloader. You can start with any part of an operating system that you find interesting and work from there. There's no requirement that you have to start here or there or whatever. Let's see. Andrew says, maybe links get filtered. Yes, I think links do get filtered. Nieman says, lesson learned, steal ideas, not staplers. Exactly. Steal ideas, not staplers. That is the lesson that we are learning today. Let's see. So Quentin says, why are many operating system kernels, etc., written in C instead of C++? Is it something fundamentally different? It feels like making things harder for yourself. Right. It is essentially making things harder for yourself. But a lot of old school, low level and kernel people are suspicious of C++ because they don't understand it and they didn't take the time to understand it. So they just irrationally dislike it. And this is really unfortunate because C++ is a vastly more convenient language than C, and you can save yourself a lot of time and effort by using it responsibly to implement low-level things. And it is unfortunate that people are so suspicious of it. C++ is too big, I think, says Mr. Airbus 5717, and growing too fast. Nobody is requiring you to use every facet of the language. I think that's a typical criticism that people have. That like, oh, it can do too many things. Well, you don't have to do all those things. It's just it is a very capable language, but you're not required to use all of its capabilities. It is very much a pick and choose type of language. Let's see. Folk says, I don't know if you talked about it, but what do you think about Rust? I have talked about this many times because it is one of the most frequently asked questions I get. And my answer is that I have not written more than 100,000 lines of Rust. And because I haven't done that, then it's not really like I have an opinion that's worth hearing. I don't think it's worth hearing opinions about languages from people who haven't spent significant time with them. Yeah. Let's see. Mustafa says, even just namespaces, basic templates, and then stick to whatever you do in C makes it vastly nicer to deal with anyway. Right. Exactly. You can pick and choose a couple of small but really impactful features from C++, bring them into your C project, don't touch any other stuff from C++, and make your life in that project so much better, so easily. It is fascinating how well that works. And actually, I often get this question from people like, I've been doing C development for 20 years. Like, how do I like approach learning C++? Like, how can I switch to C++? And what I always recommend to people like that is to just find one or two features from C++ that seems like it would be really valuable to you, and then compile your C code with a C++ compiler and just use those one or two features, but nothing else. And then just try to make the most of those features and see what you can do with them. Because I think incrementally exposing yourself to C++ features, instead of trying to integrate everything at once, just picking one or two things and like learning how to milk them is really approachable. And it seems to be popular advice. Let's see. So Jesus Mias says, what resources would you recommend for a newbie creating their first kernel? I would recommend the OSDevorg wiki, which probably you already know about, but they really do have everything on here for building your first kernel. And there's no reason not to read this wiki. Tim says, do you actually have a rough idea of how many lines of code you have written in various programming languages? I have a rough idea, sure. And C++ wins by at least 1-0 at the end. Let's see. Abdul says, I feel like I should get involved in a big open source project just to prove myself as a good programmer. Is that a bad thing? I think that's a very flawed motivation. Like that's not a good reason to join a project. You should join a project because you want to participate in a community of developers and because you want to improve the open source project being developed. Don't join a project just to show off how good you are. But maybe I'm misunderstanding what you mean, actually. This is more about proving to yourself that you can do it. I think that's not a bad idea, but it's better to approach it with the mindset that you join an open source project so that you can improve as a programmer, because that's what will happen. If you go into an open source project with the intent to improve and learn new things and learn new techniques and new patterns, you will learn new things and new patterns and stuff. And you should absolutely join open source projects for that. RWXTarXD says, but do you recommend starting with C, or is there no benefit in doing so if the end goal is learning C++? Well, I think it's easier to learn C first. It doesn't take long to learn C, and you can learn C very quickly, and then you can start layering C++ on top of it. Some people find it easier to learn C first. Other people find it easier to learn C++ first. But you just try both and see which angle feels better. And don't worry so much about, like, there's this thing that happens with beginners that they think that they have to choose the optimal beginner path or things will get very bad. But the truth is, when you're a beginner, you can choose any path and they will all go to a good place, because you just need to move forward. And basically every direction is forward from where you're standing. So just pick C or C++, whatever. Do some introductory programming, and just stop after a while and evaluate, like, oh, do I find this language nice, or do I want to switch to a different one? Let's see. R Tobar C says, how do you think the code integration process is currently working? PRs, merges, etc. Do you have any ideas how things would look like with more devs wanting to contribute? I think the code integration process is working okay. Sometimes it's moving a little bit slow, because like people get busy and don't have time to look at the pull request queue all the time, and then it clogs up and it takes a while to bring it back down. But I think it's okay. But it, like, obviously nothing scales infinitely. So if you add more and more and more people, it becomes a pain point. And that it did become a pain point when it was just me. So originally, of course, it was just me doing all the merging. And then I had to start to invite some maintainers. But now we have a group of maintainers who are helping do merges, and at the moment it is manageable. I don't know. It really depends on like what happens in the future and how many people we have to deal with. Obviously, if there's 1,000 people tomorrow who start putting patches into the PR queue, we're gonna have to figure something different out. But one thing I really like with Serenity is that we are growing organically and slowly. So I don't have to scale from 1 to 1,000 immediately, but like we can do it over time and experiment as we go. But one thing I do like is that people are actively helping each other improve their pull requests, which makes them so much easier to integrate. That's definitely a really good part of the project culture, is that people just like randomly review each other's stuff. I really appreciate that. It makes it so much it's so much smoother to actually merge things if you know that, like, oh, 2 people already looked at this and pointed out the little issues, and those have been taken care of. But yeah, I don't know. We'll have to figure out if more devs, like, if we cross some thresholds where there's too many people suddenly submitting patches, we have to figure something out. But I don't know what that is yet. Let's see. Firat says, is there any kernel or language feature you think that would make kernel development easier? I don't know. Like a kernel, a language feature that we don't currently have. I mean, like all kinds of static analysis is always nice. Maybe there could be some way to communicate to the language, because the language doesn't understand that, for example, like you can switch between different CPUs. So like you're executing a function, but from the language's perspective, you're just going from the top of the function to the bottom. And you can't tell the language that, oh, there's like we're jumping from one CPU to another here. And then like that breaks this and that assumption. I don't know if there would be a way to encode that in a way where you could communicate to the compiler that, hey, throw out your assumption about this because we switched CPU here. Or same thing with like running in an IRQ context versus a user process context, things like that. But I have no idea what they would look like, but it would be interesting to have sort of contextual awareness, like kernel context awareness somehow in the language. And then you could make interesting types of static analysis with that, maybe. Laurent says, basically, it does not really matter much what you do when you're a beginner, rather what you do 5 or 10 years down the line. Yes, precisely. It doesn't matter what you do when you're a beginner. Just do something, and you will move forward. Let's see, Jonathan Archer. Hi, Jonathan. Jonathan says, first language I learned was C++. If I could do it over, I would start with C and build up to it instead. Yeah, that's probably a reasonable approach, I think. And I've heard that from more than one person. Michelle says, hi Andreas, when new videos about performance optimization? I don't know. Sooner or later. It's one of my favorite topics, so probably sooner. Alex says, do you have any idea of how you might want to do automated bare metal testing down the road? Definitely seems like a tricky thing to do. Yes, that is definitely tricky. I don't know. I mean, in a perfect world, the system runs stably and we can do a lot of testing, just treat it as another test runner, right? And just send over binaries for it to execute. But of course, there's stuff like kernel bugs, which can be tricky because, like, what if the kernel hangs? Like, how do you recover in a situation like that? Do you use a external power supply that you can remote control, and you use a watchdog to automatically reboot, things like that? I have some experience setting up bare metal testing systems, but not super much. So it's definitely a tricky area. And one thing that's really nice in Serenity is that there's a lot of people who are really interested and knowledgeable about test automation. And I don't have to be the expert at these things because we have people who know a lot more than I do. Like Andrew Castor, who says PDU plus JTAG. Yeah, that sort of stuff. That I feel like that's still quite a ways before we get there. We'll see. Andrew says, some GPU-focused language extensions make a difference between host and device code. Maybe that could be used to do that. CPU switch or IRQ context annotation. Yeah, maybe you could. I think the more important part for prototyping something like that is coming up with the actual static analysis checks that you could implement once you have context information. And I don't know what those would be, so it's hard to suggest, make a concrete suggestion out of it if you don't know what you would use it for. Let's see. So R Tobar C says, I became slowly involved with Serenity about a month ago, and so far the community has been nice. But have you had trolls in the past? How do you deal with those situations? We have not had that many trolls. They do show up occasionally and act unpleasant, and then I just ban them and we move on. We don't tend to spend a lot of time complaining about trolls or complaining in general. It's generally a waste of time, and the thing that the trolls want you to do is to focus on them and give them your time, and not doing that is probably the best course of action. So we just ban and move on, basically. Wait, did I miss something? Well, hey, look, we're out of time. It's 6 o'clock. So we're out of time for this this week's office hours. 2 hours just flies by sometimes. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate all the questions and the interesting dialogue. It did feel a bit more interactive today somehow, which was nice. Very cool. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you for the super chats. And I hope everybody will have a great weekend. If you end up working on Serenity stuff, then please come hang out on Discord and show us what you're doing. I wish everybody good luck with the things that they asked about. Guess I'll see you all next time.